Hey everybody, time to clear your confusion about another topic. And this week, we're talking about Kirby. This is going to be a short episode, well, shorter anyway, as there's not much to talk about that's confusing about Kirby, and it's very easy to explain. The first thing to talk about is his color. Kirby is pink, but if you remember, he wasn't always that color. Back in the day, it was a source of confusion for me and my friends, and it never really got cleared up unless you made the effort to research it. Kirby first appeared on Game Boy, in Kirby's Dream Land. As you can see by the box art, he was white, and as the Game Boy was a monochromatic system, he appeared to be white in the game as well, or, well, greenish-yellow because of the original Game Boy's tinted screen. He was not only depicted on the box art as being white, but pretty much everywhere. Like most people, I didn't have the internet back in 1992, so my first exposure to Kirby was a commercial stacking the cutesy puffball up against a Duke Nukem-type hero with big muscles and guns, saying that for what Kirby lacked in all of those attributes, he made up for in appetite, and he then swallows the dude and spits him out. The second game to come out was Kirby's Adventure on the NES, and everybody was pretty surprised when Kirby was shown as not being white, but pink. Not only was it confusing to give him a completely different shade, but a lot of us didn't understand why Nintendo would do something so random and bizarre. Imagine you're a 12-year-old boy, and your friends come over, and you're playing Kirby's Adventure with a hero who's bright pink. Yeah. Nowadays it's like, hey, cool, I love that game. But back then it was like, queer. Well, that's the defending characteristic of 12-year-olds. They're immature. The game was a success anyway, due in no small part to the fact that it's awesome. Which is actually a bit of a surprise. Kirby's Adventure came out in 1993, making it one of the last major NES games. The Super NES had been around for 2 years now, and the Genesis had been around for 4. So it's not like we hadn't seen 16-bit graphics and gameplay. From then on, Kirby was pink. He changed color on occasion, such as when he absorbed certain powers, or in circumstances where he was split into multiple Kirbys by Dark Meta Knight, or in a game like Super Smash Bros. That allows you to change the color of Kirby at will to several other colors, including the original white Kirby. But the main complaint wasn't so much that pink was girly, but that it seemed unnecessary. He was fine the way he was the rallying cry. Why change what isn't broken? Well, it turns out Kirby was always meant to be pink, and he was only turned white due to a misunderstanding between the Japanese and American branches of Nintendo. Here's proof. Here's the Japanese box for the original Kirby's Dream Land, which in Japan is known as Kirby of the Stars. And I can go back further. Here's a Japanese magazine scan that predates the first game. It's a conceptual image of a character then called Popopo, who would later become Kirby. And as you can see, both of these show him as being pink. So why did he wind up being white? Well, you can actually blame Shigeru Miyamoto for this one. He didn't create Kirby or work on the games. That was done by Masahiro Sakurai. Sakurai created the Popopo character and the concept for the first game, which was originally going to be called Twinkle Popopo. The character in the game was created as a placeholder to test gameplay before a sprite was created that would more closely resemble the original drawing of Popopo. But Sakurai liked the placeholder better, and this became the character. Sakurai always intended Kirby to be pink, and this was reflected in the official art for the Japanese game. But when localizing the game to America, Sakurai let them know the character was intended to be pink, as they couldn't show that in the in-game graphics, while Shigeru Miyamoto, for whatever reason, butt in with his opinion that he thought Kirby should be yellow. So they had one guy who created the character saying pink, another guy who didn't create the character but who wields a great deal of power within the company saying yellow, and the game's own graphics which appear to be white. So there was some confusion, and Nintendo of America decided to go with white to match the game's graphics and not get involved with any sort of argument that was happening in their Japanese branch and avoid upsetting either Sakurai or Miyamoto. This brings me to the other thing about Kirby. His name. As you know from earlier, he originally had the very Japanese-sounding name of Popopo, but it was later changed to the very American-sounding Kirby. So how did that happen? Well, there are two prevailing theories. One is that the name was borrowed from the Kirby Corporation, which manufactures high-powered vacuum cleaners. You can see the connection. Kirby inhales everything just like a Kirby vacuum cleaner. As Kirby itself is also a surname, Nintendo could use it without worrying about the Kirby Corporation becoming upset about the unauthorized use of their name, which is something you'd have to worry about if they called him Electrolux or whatever. The second prevailing theory is that Kirby is named after John J. Kirby Jr. He is a lawyer who works for Latham & Watkins LLP and represented Nintendo when they were being sued by Universal Studios Incorporated. I already talked about this in an episode of Urban Legends of Video Games about Donkey Kong, but I'll recap it here for you really quick. Basically, Donkey Kong, as you know, is an obvious parody of King Kong, and Universal Studios, who claimed Donkey Kong was an unauthorized rip-off, sued Nintendo. Kirby defended Nintendo successfully by bringing to light that Universal had previously been accused of stealing King Kong from RKO, who made the original film, and that Universal Studios successfully argued that King Kong was in the public domain. Well, you can't claim something is in the public domain one minute and then claim you own sole rights to it the next, so Universal's lawsuit was thrown out. It said that Kirby was named after John Kirby to honor his defense of their character, without which we wouldn't have some of the most popular characters in video gaming. So, which story is true? Unfortunately, it's not possible to definitely say for sure, as Sakurai himself says he has no recollection of how the character was named. Personally, I think he's full of shit. This was said after he had left Nintendo, and I think he probably either didn't want to or perhaps wasn't allowed to give away an important piece of company history. Or perhaps he enjoys the mystique of the character and doesn't want to tell anyone which story is true, if indeed it is either of those. Personally, I go for the lawyer story. Nintendo had set a precedent for naming their characters after real people, the perfect example being their flagship character Mario, who was named after Mario Segale, landlord of one of the warehouses that Nintendo used in an early American headquarters, who is said to physically resemble their Jumpman character, who was later renamed to Mario. Segale was an important figure in Nintendo history, even if his role seems inconsequential. He was the one who rented them their first property in America, thus allowing Nintendo of America to exist. And Kirby was important too. He allowed them to use the name and design of Donkey Kong, which is the game that birthed the Mario character and Nintendo's popularity to begin with. So, I think that's everything that's confusing about Kirby. Everything important, anyway. Join me next week and we'll talk about one of the most popular modern video game franchises, which is also one of the most confusing.